And welcome, ladies and gents. Mr. Cowan here with you for Chapter 2, Lessons 6 and 7, more decimal quotients, dividing decimals. But first, go ahead and pause, take a look at the previous assignment, check your answers, and come on back when you're ready. All right, folks, think about where we've been. Multiplying decimals by whole numbers, or decimals by decimals for that matter. Now, where we're going today, whereas before you might have divided by a whole number, now we're going to change this whole number into a decimal divisor. So we will divide decimals by decimals, and we're going to use a shortcut to divide by powers of 10. Whereas before we have multiplied it by powers of 10 and used a shortcut with that. Now we're going to teach you to divide. Sorry about that mess. All right. Eventually, you will need both the multiplication and division of decimals to get into algebra. So that is where we're going, is equations with decimals. Pause for a second. Go ahead and title whatever the date is for this particular assignment, whatever the assignment number is. Write assignment number blank, compute decimal quotients, name, date, period. Pages 41 and 43. Now, please note for page 43 only, you will not be showing work. I will show you a mental math shortcut. Don't forget, every time we do a problem, you're to write the directions, write the problem, write your work, and write your answer. Now, only page 43 will you be getting and saying, nope, Mr. Cowan asked us to do mental math. Exceptions to that, do not write out entire word problems. And then like I just talked about, mental math. All right, pause your video, come on back when you're ready. So we're gonna start, ladies and gents, with the division of two examples. But before we go there, I want to just remind you of a couple things. Firstly, if I were to write any number, whole number, fraction, decimal, if I were to write any number times 1, you're going to say, well, Mr. Cowan, that's going to give us the same quantity. Any number times 1 is itself. But I want you to remember that, because I could change this to 10 tenths, and that's still a whole. If you multiply any number by 10 tenths, that's the same as multiplying by 1 whole. You have not changed the problem. It's still itself. Okay, Mr. Cowan, then why are you doing it? Well, in that particular case, you would now divide 401 by 8 wholes, and you no longer have that ugly, nasty decimal in the denominator, in the divisor. So that, ladies and gents, is going to be the first point. When dividing anything, if your divisor is a decimal, change that into a whole number. And of course, you have to be fair. 10 tenths is a whole. So anything you do to the denominator, do to the numerator. Anything you do to the divisor, do the dividend. And now what we have essentially is 401 and 2 tenths divided by 8. Now notice I did not change that to 4,000. That's not fair. If you move one spot in the divisor, you must move one and only one spot in the dividend. Now we can go ahead, put your decimal point up, and go ahead and start dividing. 4 does not break down at 8 times, but 40 does, leaving none left over. Hey, that was good. Then we have a 1 here, but 1 cannot be split up. So I'm going to write that 0. Don't forget that 0. That tends to be a class weakness. Bring down a 2. 12 can be split up into 8s into one group of 8, as a matter of fact. And just when you're getting frustrated, don't forget, you may put a 0 there. After all, there are no hundredths as of yet. But if we split 40 pennies into 8 parts, then everybody gets 5 pennies. Now let's go into a similar problem. Here we have 1 4 tenths divided by 35 hundredths. Now if I were to write this in fraction form and write divide by 1, you're going to say, okay, Mr. Cowan, that's not going to change the problem. Can I please point out, though, that if I multiply by 10 tenths, that's still a whole, you're going to get 14, you're going to get 3 and 5 tenths, and we don't want to divide by a decimal. So that's not very helpful. Okay. Well, instead of multiplying by 10 tenths, let's go an extra power of 10. Let's go by 100 hundredths. Still one whole. But now we move it once and twice, putting in a 0 here. We move it once and twice, and no more decimal as a divisor. So when you're writing this, 1 4/10 split up by 35 hundredths, what we're going to do is we're going to move that decimal once, twice. We're going to move it once, twice. And if you wish, you don't have to rewrite it, ladies and gents, but if you wish, essentially what you have right now is 140 split up 35 times. Now I'm going to show you not rewriting it, just with the decimal place. So make sure you have that decimal place where it belongs. 35 does not go into 1, nor does 35 go into 14, but it does go into 140. Now, I'm going to go ahead and try 4 times. 4 times 5 is 20, so I'm going to carry a 2. 4 times 3 is 12. Oh, look at that. It ends up being a perfect 4 wholes. You don't have to write the decimal. You don't have to write 4.0. All you need to do is say, hey, $1.40 divided into 35-cent parts would make us 4 groups of those. But the key and the most important part, remember please, a little bit of disappearing ink here. If you multiply by a whole, and you multiply by a whole, you're not changing the problem. If you multiply by 10 tenths, you'll move it 1 time. If you multiply by 100 hundredths, you'll move it 2 times. But you're still essentially multiplying by a whole, so you're not messing up the problem. You're just making it a lot easier by not having a decimal divisor. Change this guy to 35, change this guy to 8 wholes, but still, it's going to come up with the correct answer. All right, now we get into some shortcuts dividing by powers of 10. Now remember, please, before we did this, we multiplied. We're not multiplying anymore. We're going to divide both of these problems by powers of 10. Now, when dividing by 100 or 10 or 1,000 or any power of 10, you're simply going to move that decimal point. Now, because you're dividing by a power of 10, it's getting smaller, so you have to move it to the left. The number of zeros, which I think has an O in it, I'm not sure. So here's what I mean. If you divide by 10, it's going to move it 1 place to the left, making 4 wholes and 715 thousandths. If you divide the same quantity by 100, that's 10 to the second power. That's 2 zeros. So we're going to move it to the left not once but twice, leaving us with no wholes. 4,715 ten thousandths. What about the 3 zeros? Well, in that case, you're going to move it once, twice, and thrice. And of course, fill in the blank. Still no wholes, but now we have 4,715 tenths, hundredths, 1,010, 100 thousandths. Now, folks, go ahead and put that 0 in as well. So just as multiplying by powers of 10 makes it larger and we move it to the right, dividing by powers of 10 makes it smaller and moves to the left. That's all I have for today, ladies and gents. Once again, a reminder, please, to put a squiggly line underneath all your notes. Go into the directions, problem work, and answer. Don't forget those exceptions. And for page 43 only, write the problem and your answer, but do not write work down for page 43 only. That's what I got. Take care, do well, and let's grow.